Carlos Mendoza needs to be fired. He needs to be fired. And there is no universe in which he should stay as the manager of the New York Mets. Anyone who thinks that he should is an idiot who lacks brain cells. Because most of the Mets struggles throughout May, most of them were not on the players. The players actually did their jobs for the most part. Yes, Alonso has been disappointing. Yes, McNeil has been disappointing. Yes, Francisco Lindor is incredibly boom or bust. But we have seen what Christian Scott can do as pitcher. And we've also seen some of our other stars shine. We see Mark Vientos having a breakout. JD Martinez. Brandon Nimmo. Now let's get pull up the exact stats page. And yes, it is true that only one player has an 800 OPS. But still, there is talent on this Mets team. The Giants, who currently hold the third wildcard spot, have a less talented roster than the Mets, but they have a better manager. Carlos Mendoza cannot put the Mets into a position to succeed. First of all, I don't know why they hired him. Buck Schweitzer had a terrible 2023 season as the Mets collapsed in early June and never recovered, finishing 75 and 87. That's bad. But in 2022, he guided the Mets to 101 and 61, which on paper made them World Series title contenders and was their second best season in franchise history. Disaster struck at the end when they got swept by the Braves to lose the division, and then got beaten by the Padres in the wild card round. But as a coach who guided your team to the playoffs, you should not fire him the year after, barring insane circumstances. Yes, there have been coaches in NFL history who have gotten fired, right after making the playoffs. In 2006, when the Chargers went 14-2 and they still fired their head coach for getting them through really good regular season records and not showing up in the playoffs. Yes, we have seen that before. We have seen the Bucks' crazy front office for the NBA. Still though, a head coach who makes the playoffs should not be fired the year after. They just shouldn't be. In the NFL, obviously if McCarthy doesn't make the playoffs next year, he'll be fired, or if he's another first-round exit. But that's because he's consistently guided his team to the playoffs 3 times and has had 1 playoff win in 3 seasons. Nick Sirianni, if he doesn't take his team to the playoffs, yes, he'll be fired. But the Eagles also have one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. They start off 10-1, however fluky it might have been, and then they finish with the season 11-6 and with first-round exits. That kind of a collapse puts you on mega thin ice, even if you made it to the Super Bowl the year earlier. But Buck Schweitzer should have been given 1 more season to prove himself on the Mets. I think that with Buck, I don't think the Mets are quite in a playoff position, but they're doing better than 24-34, which is really bad. I can't blame Mendoza too much for last night's loss, for yesterday's loss, which is June 1st. I really can't. The Mets were down 10-1 heading into the 9th, and they lost 10-5. That was just poor performance on both sides of the ball from the players. And even though they won on Friday night, 10-9, Mendoza, that would still be used as evidence to fire Mendoza. Because he put another crappy reliever in, and that reliever, as it turned out, sucked. And the Mets had a 10-5 lead heading into the top of the 9th, and they finished 10-9. They almost blew it. Yes, I know that the bottom of the 9th would still have to be played, and Even if they only allowed one more run, then they would have to go to extra innings and all that crap. But still. And we've seen very similar stuff where he put Edwin Diaz in against the Marlins. A 9-5 lead in the middle of the ninth turned into a 10-9 loss. Now you can't blame Mendoza too much for that at the start. But then putting Edwin Diaz in when you only have a 2-1 lead over the Giants on May 25th was a really bad idea, because now you've seen that that Diaz can't hit. Sure enough, the Mets allow a run, tied up at 2-2, and then collapse in extra innings and lose 7-2. The game before, another crappy reliever he put in, who had no business being in the game, let up 5 runs in the top of the 8th, and the Mets went on to lose 8-7 after a 6-2 lead. Carlos Mendoza can't hold down a lead. And again, any one of these examples on their own, you can't fire him. Coaches make mistakes. But it's this repeated trend of of blowing late leads. May 13th, they hold a 4-2 lead against the Philadelphia Phillies. But then they allow 2 runs at the top of the 9th. Again, another crappy reliever. And lose 5-4. Like, come on. And here's the thing. Sometimes it's not his fault. Jose Quintana, who they put in once, was actually one of the best pitchers in the MLB in terms of not allowing home runs. And then in the 3rd inning against the Braves, he let up 3 home runs in 1 inning. So some of that stuff you can't blame Mendoza on. But when you've seen your players consistently underperform, and you keep putting them in the game despite the fact that you know that they underperform, that's a different story. That is 100% a different story. Carlos Mendoza cannot tell who his best players are and what positions to put them in. As a manager, that's 100% your job. And before you make the argument that the Mets were not going to do anything productive this season anyway, there's 2 counterclaims. First of all, the Mets were at one point 12-8 and looked to make the playoffs in April. They had the hottest record in baseball from April 5th to 21st. But then after that, they had the worst record in baseball. And they still seem dead in the water. Second of all, we've seen what other coaches can do. We've seen other teams do more with less. Look at the 2022 New York Giants. I mean, I hate them. I hate the Giants. But Brian Daboll deserves a lot of respect. Yes, the 2022 Giants, I think, were fraudulent. Had the easiest schedule in the entire NFL. Really could not beat any teams with a winning record. They beat the Ravens and whatnot. And they did beat the Commanders, who finished at 500, but not above. But they lost to the Lions. They lost to the Seahawks. They lost to the... They got swept by the Eagles and the Cowboys. They lost to the Vikings, though the Vikings were just as fraudulent as the Giants were last year and 2022. But Daboll still guided them to a 9-7-1 record and to the playoffs. And in the playoffs, they even beat the Minnesota Vikings. So they even got a playoff win under Daboll for the first time since 2011. He got Coach of the Year. He managed to do that with Daniel Jones at quarterback. So, if a coach can guide Daniel Jones to the playoffs, then less talented teams still have a shot. Because no one gave the Giants a fighting chance in 2022 to do anything productive. And they did. They were one of the final 8 teams in the NFL. because of the excellent coaching of Brian Daboll. So there really are no excuses. Bad coaching is a big part of why the Mets are sucking right now.